Okay, shall we get started? Hi, everyone. Yeah, as I said, this isn't John Parker. My name is Emma Gill-Martin, and I'm a Senior Technical Officer here at the Arboricultural Association. I am your host in the hot seat tonight. Nor am I joining you from the Malt House. I'm at home here in North Wales, and that seems only right for a Friday. Make sure to tell us where you're joining us from in the chat, but address your messages to everyone, not just to the hosts and panelists. Tonight then, I'm delighted to bring you a special webinar to mark International Women's Day. We've brought straight to your screens a lineup of 3 brilliant speakers from the tree care community. We've got Cecily Withall, we've got Louise Hackett, and we've got Sharon Durdant-Hollamby. Each of them are going to give you a short talk about their experience and their area of special interest. So you can add your questions to the Q&A box below, and we'll return to any questions if we've got time at the end of the session. Before I hand over then to the brilliant lineup, I'm going to first introduce Mandy Maynard. Now, Mandy is the chair of the association's Women in Arboriculture Working Group, and Mandy is going to share just a quick update on the working group's activities and achievements so far. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mandy. Hi, Mandy.
Hi, thanks, Emma. Thanks for that. And hello, everybody that's joined us. I won't keep you because I know you're all tuned in for our amazing speakers, but I just wanted to let you know that we are doing lots of work on behalf of women in arboriculture. So we started the group back in 2018. We're only a small group, but we do have a wide reach in the industry. We've all got different strengths, but we've all got the same goal, which is diversity and equality in arboriculture. So our main aims for the group is to identify where we need to help and encourage diversity, help women to feel like they have a place in arboriculture, which is really important, encouraging manufacturers to understand the need for the correct PPE that's fit for purpose for women, and we don't just have to fit into what's made already for men. Mentoring women who would like to start a career in ARB but are not sure where to begin. And giving women a voice to understand it's okay to pull someone up on how they communicate with you and not just be told it's banter. So that's something that we've really had to work towards. So what have we achieved so far? We've achieved, as I said, our voice for others, for other people who don't want to speak up. We can speak up for them. As I said, we are a small group, but we do have a very large reach. Through the ARB Association, we published 12 Women in ARB, which you can still find on the ARB Association website and also Lantra's website. And this highlights 12 different careers. It's not just always about trees, it can be something else that's associated with arboriculture. So that's quite interesting and worth having a look at. We hosted a conference for women in ARB at the prestigious Kew Gardens, which are where our Cecily works, which is fantastic. We had international speakers, we had local speakers. And what was lovely about that event, it was really well attended, but there was one particular lady who attended who was really close to not coming. She was really nervous, but she felt really welcomed. She had a fantastic chat with Cecily, and I'm really glad to report that a year on, she's now almost a fully qualified arborist, and she's working in the industry, which was a huge shift, huge career change for her, but that was brilliant. We've managed to engage with manufacturers, and I'm very glad to say that PPE is now being produced by Fanna, who are a very high-end brand. and they do trousers, gloves and boots specifically for women now, which is amazing. And on top of that, Protos helmets are now being produced in a much more wider range of sizes so that they're fit for all, which is a great achievement. Took us a long time, a lot of door knocking, but we've got there, so that's brilliant. And then on the side issues, we've spoken in schools about careers, we've met with organisations about the importance of inclusivity. We asked recruiters to stop wording adverts as if they're talking to a man, so it makes it a little bit more inclusive and a bit more welcoming. And obviously we have a stand at the Arb Show to meet and encourage new people. And we're happy to do this for as long as we need to. We're hoping one day we won't have to, when equality and diversity is the norm, we'll leave you all alone. But that's what we're about. That's what we're up to. And if there's anything else you feel that we should be doing, obviously just pop it in the chat to Emma and we'll add it to any of our agendas. Thanks for listening about Women in Art, because it's really quite important. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you, Mandy. Yeah, I think we popped in a few links for people to go looking at Women in Arb social media and the stuff we've got on the website, the 12 Faces of Arb as well. Hope you'll get involved if you feel like you want to be involved and we can help and support you in some way. Great. All right, Cecily, I think you're up. You there?
Hi, hello. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to the Arboricultural Association for inviting me tonight to talk and participate in this webinar. And I really look forward to hearing from Louise and Sharon later on, but I thought I'll start my PowerPoint and introduce myself. So bear with while I try and screen share. Okay. So I'm going to introduce myself a little bit and then more importantly talk about the work we do at Kew to look after our massive global collection of trees. So I'll start. My name is Cecily Withall and I'm a climbing arborist at Kew. It was not always my first passion. I left school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was a waitress in Edinburgh from a small Scottish village. I leapt at the ability to get to the big city. And I was there for a few years until I was lucky enough to go travelling with a friend. And we were working on different farms in Italy. And something just clicked. I absolutely loved working outside. And it's really funny, actually, it took me to leave Scotland to really work out that land-based studies was where I was going to see my passions in life. So from there, I rushed back to the UK and I started a 2-year diploma at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Edinburgh, which I was really, really lucky to get into. And it was mad, it was full on, but it really threw me into a world of botanical horticulture. And it showcased all sorts of things from horticulture in glass to herbaceous borders, but something really caught my eye, and that was when I was on a placement with the tree unit at Edinburgh. And I really decided it was something that I wanted to follow, and they were the ones to suggest for me to go to Kew Gardens and meet the tree team at Kew and really find out if it was something I wanted to specialise into. So I rushed to Kew. I was lucky enough to be taken for work experience for a few weeks. And the team were amazing. They threw me up a tree on the first day and I managed to get through it. It would have been a long work experience if I'd hated it on the first day. But I really enjoyed it. And I came back to Edinburgh and really had a goal in mind, and I finished my diploma and I was really lucky enough to be invited to an apprenticeship at Kew with the Arboricultural unit. which I'll talk about briefly later on. But I was there for 2 years, and when I completed that, a job came up which I applied for, and I've been here ever since. So I've been really, really lucky and supported in the industry, which I know is not everyone's story. But I think it makes me more passionate because I really want to share that it doesn't have to be so difficult. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the apprenticeship because I think it's really important. It's really what kickstarted my journey, and it was really gave me my career. It's been a fantastic opportunity. Not only that I worked full time for 2 years with paid employment at the Botanics in London, but I was also through it's linked through an agricultural college in Berkshire. And they put me through all of my courses, all of my certification, alongside working at Kew, where I was able to practice and really gain an understanding in the practical and technical abilities of that. And those who are supporting themselves and putting themselves through these tickets know how expensive they are. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity to have the studies provided for you and have support in that, because I know it's really tricky otherwise. So for those out there wanting to start a career in arboriculture, or employers listening who might be able to take on an apprentice, it changed my life, and it gave me the opportunity to really start my career. So I can really, really recommend an apprenticeship if you can find one, because they're fantastic. And since then, it granted me my job, but I know apprentices in the past at Kew have gone on to do amazing things as well. So it really can start someone's journey in the right direction. But enough about me. I wanted to talk about Kew in general and our amazing collection of trees. So we have 12,000 trees across site. We are 350 acres wide. So it's a massive, massive site, and our collection is a global collection of trees from all over the world that are so important. I mean, you couldn't put a monetary value on our collection. It is fantastic. We are at the moment a team of 4 climbers, an apprentice for the next 2 years. He started in September, and a full-time groundie who looks after us, makes sure we don't get up to too much mischief. So all our collections of trees across Kew are put on a GPS mapping system. So we have the ability to have all of the information for us on an app, which then means that when we walk through the gardens, we can walk past a tree and pull up the information based on the history of that tree. And that then also feeds into the inspection ratios and obviously the works that need to be done. So that all feeds into the same app, which we use as a team to do our day-to-day jobs. And that could be anything from dead wooding, aerial inspections to have a little look and see what cavity you might be doing up within the canopy of a tree, or we might be doing reductions, a little weight reduction, or in some cases we do have to remove trees at Kew. So this system I think is the best to, if I talk with the next slide, because I think it gives you a grander idea of what we're looking at. So this is Kew Gardens as a whole. We have the Thames running at the top and along, I'm not sure you can see my mouse, but this is Kew Road that runs along the bottom, and that's a really important road because obviously you've got Richmond on the left and the M4 on the right. So, you know, busy parts of West London. Now, obviously our tree work sits in different priorities based on obviously the amount of people that we have in those areas, the age of the tree in that area, and obviously maybe the frequency of that area being used. So we put them down to different zones. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. Obviously, 1s are high priority. They sit around the entrances, the restaurants, public restrooms, larger event spaces, big glass houses. Those are obviously a higher priority for us, and trees in those areas will be inspected, and then due to their age or their special needs, they might then need to be looked at more frequently depending on the work that needs to be done. Areas further out into the garden, in zones 2. Those are obviously frequented heavily during the summer, but they might not see so much footfall in the rest of the year. So the difference is those trees might be looked at differently. And then we have the conservation area, which sits at the top left of the screen, which is in zone 3. And that's such a juxtaposition for us at Kew, because we are obviously very proactive of the tree work at the rest of the garden. But in the conservation area, it's fantastic because we have very little influence there, because the public are kept away from this area. So our duty of care to the public and staff in this area is almost nil. We don't have to worry about them coming into risk with trees that we can leave to age and die naturally. So our standing deadwood area allows trees to live their lives without us going and poking and prodding them, which is fantastic, and such a lovely balance for the rest of the garden, which we are obviously very proactive about the work that we do, and we are removing deadwood and we are reducing the risk to the public, but also maintaining the collection for its own longevity. The work that we do is also for the benefit of the trees. But I do think the balance of the conservation area and the rest of the site is just fantastic, and it really gives us a broad sense of a difference in our day-to-day as well. The jobs that we carry out are so different and varied depending on where we are in the gardens, and obviously the view helps, but it's a fantastic place to work. And yes, so I wanted to talk about some of our collections, and this is one of my favourite ever trees to talk about at Kew. This is the Turner's Oak. If you've ever been to Kew, it's very big, stands pretty proud. It's a mix of Quercus ilex and Roba, which is a home and English oak. It's named after the nurseryman who created it himself. It's believed that it could have been one of the initial saplings at the time from Mr. Turner himself, planted at Kew in 1798. Now, this is not one of our oldest trees at Kew, but maybe one of our most significant trees at Kew, due to the story and miracle behind it. Now, it's said that in the late 1990s, pre the storm, that this tree was losing some vigour. It was not very happy. His canopy was showing signs that it was in distress. And then came along the Great Storm of 1987, which I'm sure many of you heard about, worked through, dealt with. I mean, it was devastating for the whole of the UK. We lost 15 million trees overnight. And just at Kew, we lost 700 within one night. So you can imagine the carnage that the tree arboricultural unit came into that day. Now, this story could have had a very sad ending, but this tree is a miracle because it still stands at Kew today, to showcase really what had happened and the benefits for this tree in particular that came out of it. During the storm, this tree was completely lifted from its root plate, shaken around in the winds, and then dropped back. As I stated, the vigour of this tree had not been doing very well. So when the tree team came in that morning, this was not priority. There was so much more going on. So they propped it and left it, and they would come back to it when they could. And to its own benefit, I think the storm struck this tree, because within that shaking around and the root plate being completely lifted, it broke down that compaction that had already been hurting and wounding the tree system itself. And that allowed water and nutrients to re-enter the root system. And as you can see today, we still have this tree proud within our gardens. And I think it really started the thought process of this root to tip holistic tree care that we now prioritize at Kew, and how important that is. So this was kind of like the most famous tree for me in my eyes of the story that arboriculture has at Kew. We're really lucky nowadays to be able to have a better understanding of what's going on within the gardens and how we can help our tree collection from the soil upwards. But we obviously have some complications. We obviously are looking at more than 2 million members of the public a year and rising. We are hugely busy all year round, and that leads to really heavy compaction. It doesn't help that we're on Thames soil, which is super rocky. You dig anything down below a metre at Kew and you hit solid rock. So it's like the worst place for a botanic garden to have been planted in the first place. But our trees seem to find their way and they are so resilient. But there is things that we can do to help them. And for those, I'm sure many of you know what these machines are, but for those who don't, on the left is an air spade, which breaks up the top layer around the root plate, and it's like a compressed air that just churns it up. It's very messy, but it does break up that top layer of compaction, allowing rain and nutrients to get into the root system, and it can be very helpful. On the right-hand side of the screen is something that we've been trying over the last couple of years called the VOGT. It's a geo-inject, which fires compressed air deeper down into the soil and breaks open that compaction and breaks open that soil pan. And then during that time, as you break it up, you can actually then insert things like biochar or inert clay. Now, biochar is a charcoal soil enhancer that we can use to help some of our really poorly trees. Or if you just want to keep that pan open, we sometimes use an inert clay. It's sort of got a texture of like cat litter, but it just keeps the pathway open once you've broken the compaction, allowing the water and nutrients to still enter within the tree. And it's really important for us because it means that we can then start helping the tree from the ground up. And they're really easy things that we can be doing. Obviously, we're very fortunate to have these machines at Kew, but the science is there, and it's really exciting that we're able to use it for our collection. Now, sometimes at Kew, we had to make harder decisions. I said that we have a obviously aging collection here at Kew, with a lot of our major trees in their maturity. And sometimes those decisions had to be that we have to remove the tree, but we have the ability to back up those decisions with some fantastic pieces of technology, which is super exciting for students and staff alike to be able to learn and witness these pieces of machinery at hand. And again, I'm just going to explain it for those who haven't seen them before. On the left of the screen is an ash, which you can see has a huge colonisation of Inonotus hispidus, which affects the heartwood of the ash. So we were concerned about the cavity behind the hole that you can see. So the resistor graft creates a graft of a small skinny needle that is powered by a drill that gets pushed into the trunk at the point that you want to look at. And then it's the resistance on that needle that tells you whether or not there might be a cavity there. Now, in conjunction, we then might use something like the PICUS, which is a sonic tomograph, tricky word. This is a Quercus frenetto that sadly failed in 2022, but you can see that it was obviously not very well with the meriparous brackets around the base of the trunk. So the sonic tomography, the PICUS, builds a different picture for us to look at internally. It's like a X-ray eyes for us to see within the internal structure of the tree. And that sends sound waves around the band that you create. You can see here they've done it at the base of the tree. That's quite often because you're looking to see what those rootier bits at the bottom of the tree are doing. So you attach the sensors all the way around, and then the sound waves are fired back and forth, and it builds up this bigger picture. Now, this picture here that I've attached is not actually the one from the Quercus frenetto, but I wanted you to be able to see what you might find or what might be given back from the PICUS. The colours represent different parts that are going on within the tree. So the brown on the outside is more solid wood. So that's showing that there was something bouncing on that sound decay for them to see. But as you go internally, the pinker region, that is active decay. And that's what the the sonic tomography is showing us. And even then, the blue on this picture is showing a giant cavity within the tree. So it's really, really important for us to be able to understand with our older, larger trees at Kew what's going on internally, because it might look structurally sound from the outside, but if we don't know what's going on inside, it's really hard to then make decisions based on the longevity of them within our collection. So it's obviously sad that we lose trees at Kew, but I feel like our decisions are really based on some truth, and that's really important for us. I just wanted to finish up with a few slides, and I wanted to talk about obviously climate change, but I think it's more important for me to discuss what's going on behind the scenes at Kew. We are climate modelling, which is something a bit different, and we're looking at the climate that we have at Kew at the moment and then our future climate and what we can do about it. We obviously know that in the last couple of years since the lockdown, we've had some very, very hot summers at Kew, and our trees have really suffered. In the last 40 years, our rainfall across West London has halved, which is absolutely crazy. If you imagine, some of the trees we have at Kew are over 200 years old. So that has drastically changed in their life cycle, and they're really struggling. So what do we do? What do we do going forward? We're a botanic garden that's collecting trees and keeping them alive in a living collection. We are, for instance, looking at a living library in that sense. But actually, obviously, it's sad that we're losing many trees. But we're also, in our living library, having trees that are thriving, and we can see that within the collection, and that's really important for us to pick those trees and research them and find out why they're doing so well, and that links back into the climate modelling. So I know this is a horrible slide to end on because there's so much going on in it, but I was very lucky and fortunate enough to be given some data from Kevin Martin, who is the head of trees based on predictions for 2090. And this is all going to be used for the Kew's living collections and our succession plan that's coming out this April. So you can see lots of different dots across the screen, and they're all colour coordinated to a small selection of species that we already grow at Kew, which is why we've been interested in them. But these observations that are mapped on the screen are trees that are growing within their natural ecosystems across the world at the moment. And then obviously Kew is then mapped on at the moment at 2020 in the red, and you can see lots of blues and greens going on there. But if you look at the predicted 2090, the species that we will be able to grow within our climate completely changes. And that is obviously terrifying. You're starting to cut out things like Quercus robur, which is our English oak. But things that we already grow at Kew are doing well in this system. Things like Celtis, Parotia, Zelkova that we have in the collection already have just not been faced by the last couple of years with the lack of rain and the increase in temperature. So we really need to be focusing on collecting trees from their native parts that we can then grow at Kew to protect our collection for the future. So these statistics will be used to understand our future climate and to source seeds from these climatic niches going forward to give our collection the best chance of survival for the future. And I think that's really important to understand, that we are but keepers at time at Kew. We hold and look after a collection of trees that needs to be there for the future, for research, education, and our future generations to come. So we need to be planting trees that will survive in the future and not trees for the present. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't waffle too much. Yeah, I shall now come back out.
Thank you, Cecily. That was brilliant.
You're so welcome.
What a privilege it must be to work at Kew Gardens. And you must have so many pinch yourself moments.
Definitely.
I've probably got a couple of questions for you at the end, but we've got a couple of questions. Please do put your questions in the Q&A if you've got any for Cecily, and we'll ask those at the end. But no need for me to dither. I think I'll go straight on to our next speaker, who is Louise Hackett. Lou, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cecily. That was really interesting. And yes, thank you for inviting me today to talk about my work in Sherwood. I'm just going to attempt sharing my screen. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So yes, just to introduce myself to begin with, my name is Louise Hackett. I work for Woodland Trust, and I lead on our Sherwood treescape, which I will tell you a little bit more about throughout this presentation. So just to give a bit of background about myself, I've worked for the Trust coming up to 14 years now. I've had various roles ranging from woodland creation to ancient woodland restoration. My very first job at the Trust was actually for the ancient tree hunt, which was a kind of comms and engagement project that was the precursor to the ancient tree inventory. And for the past 5 years, I've been focusing on Sherwood, which is a landscape scale conservation project, looking at how we create transformational change for trees and woods across the landscape. And we have 9 of those across the UK that we work to as an organisation. And when I say Sherwood, I suspect this is what probably comes to a lot of people's mind. It's being Robin Hood and his merry men and a magnificent tree. And certainly, just to give a bit of background, so I'm going to give a bit of context to the work I do and a bit of a history about Sherwood. So Sherwood has been a significant landscape for over 1,000 years. And originally, one of its first names was Scoyuda, meaning wood that belongs to the Shire. And it's obviously since kind of transformed into Sherwood over time. And this is one of the first maps that depicts its location in a landscape. This is a Gough map from kind of around 1400. And you can see 2 trees entwined. And I think if we were able to have a logo for this landscape, it should absolutely be that image. And kind of royal forests, just to give a bit of background there as well. So Sherwood was a royal forest. When we talk about forests, certainly in England, what we're referring to is areas that were subject to forest law. And there were many of these landscapes across England, and this is essentially where the vert and the venison was protected for virtue of the king. Yes, penalties of kind of taking which would have generated a large revenue. So yes, it's an interesting landscape with a long and fascinating history. And just for those people that are joining us internationally, I've just circled where Sherwood is, so you can see where we are located. So the boundary that I work to currently is Sherwood Treescape. I work to an area which is called National Character Area. England has been split up into these character areas. And for Sherwood, this largely follows the geology of the landscape, which is Sherwood sandstone. And this looks very different to what it did historically, but certainly the vast majority of the landscape now outside of urban areas is arable farmland. And we also have a lot of secondary plantation woodlands, and we also have some very special remnants of the forest that once was. We as an organisation just own 3 very small sites in this landscape, Hannah Park Wood in the north, Newstead Priory Wood down south, and then the most southerly one is Holland Wood. And just to give you a bit of an idea of how these habitats have changed or what we've lost over time, these are some fantastic images that were produced by Sherwood Forest Trust, mainly looking at heathland. So this has kind of followed the records of heathland loss through our landscape. I think use lowland heathland here as a proxy for wood pasture, and certainly these landscapes would have been rich in open grown old growth features, and from 1700 onwards you can see there's been a drastic loss of habitat over time. So this is one of the things that really, from a biodiversity perspective, we're interested in addressing. So this is a beautiful image I took literally a month ago in Sherwood when we had just one day of snow. But this is the major oak, probably one of the most famous trees we have in Sherwood. Historically, it was also called the Queen Oak or Pen Oak, and probably a lot of people may not be aware that it's actually named after Major Hayman Rooke, who famously illustrated a number of named trees from across this landscape. And certainly this image is quite often given as, or labelled as the Queen Oak, which was historically its name. But in fact, I'm not sure that's true. So speaking to a colleague of mine earlier, actually, we were discussing it because this is something that I've been interested in. Emily Sloan wrote this fantastic book about Hayman Rooke. And actually, the original illustration was never labelled with a name, as others were, and his description of the tree was very different. So I had wondered whether Robin Hood's larder, which was another named tree in this landscape, was that tree. I'm not so sure, actually, and actually, from his description, I wonder whether it's just one of many thousands of oak trees that we've lost from this landscape over time. In fact, in 1686, there were over 72,000 records of hollow oaks, and we certainly don't have anywhere near as many as that now. And Robin Hood's larder has since been lost, in fact, too. Here I am stood in its place. You can just about see the metal banding that you can see in the Victorian photograph that once were wrapped around that tree as they attempted to keep it standing. But now that tree has sadly almost completely disappeared. And there are other famous named trees such as the Greendale Oak, the Seven Sisters, many of which were illustrated and have some fantastic stories I'd recommend you go away and read up about. One of my favourites is the Parliament Oak, and I'd really like to tell you its story. So this is one of Rooke's illustrations of the Parliament Oak in 1790. It sat at the entrance to Clipston Deer Park, which was a significant deer park for a long time, and it sits on the boundary as well. And we've got some fantastic historical illustrations and also photographs of what this tree looked like. So here you can see they started propping it, trying to keep it standing. Clearly of interest to people at that time, even in the 1800s. And then later on, you can see more metalwork appearing in the tree, but it's certainly fragmented, and you can start to see that you've got two very distinct fragments still standing there that was once one whole tree. So these kind of functional units remaining. And again, later, just a small amount of deadwood still kind of propped between the two, and then it's starting to break apart even further. And at this point, it's in kind of 1970s, it was starting to really be neglected. And although you can see another fence has been put around the tree here, you can also see rubbish in the foreground, and it was not particularly a very good location or cared for location for this tree. And then it's starting to get a bit encroached by other trees. But Sherwood Forest Trust did a fantastic job of kind of revitalising and kind of highlighting the importance of this tree. And you can't quite make out in this picture, but there's an information board that tells you the history. Because certainly I think looking at this tree now, you would never really know the history. I don't think you could look at this tree cold and read that fantastic history of the tree, because you've really only got one functional unit remaining. A lot of people think there's two, but actually when you study the photographs, it is just one unit, and that's a younger tree on the left-hand side. So it's the section on the right that I think is the remaining fragment, which is fully precluded. You'd look at the tree and you would think it's probably, I don't know, about 80, 100 years old. And we recently have now fenced off this tree as well. So using Green Recovery Challenge Fund funding from DEFRA, it was starting to have compaction issues. And although the tree wasn't showing a negative response to that compaction, ideally we don't really want to wait until that point. So it's now being fenced off with sweet chestnut clay fencing, to just keep people out of that root area as much as we could, given the constraints of its location. But also this fencing replicates the traditional cleft fencing that would have surrounded the deer park as well. So it kind of feeds into the kind of reading of the landscape. But I think locally as well, people have really celebrated that this kind of highlights how important this tree is. But I think also just from those of us that admire trees and, you know, I think it's a fantastic example of what trees are capable, and perhaps that we're overlooking in trees that we see elsewhere. So just to highlight again a landscape scale, the green dots on this map are records of ancient and veteran trees we have across this landscape. So this is from the ancient tree inventory, and you can see that kind of little hot spot in the middle. That's Birkelands and Bilhall, which is where the main concentration of ancient and veterans are, and is quite often referred to as Sherwood Forest. But this entire landscape is certainly Sherwood Forest historically, and there are fragments across this landscape that do link to that. And whilst we have these fantastic records, what we don't know is what's missing. So the ancient inventory is perhaps limited by the fact that anyone can put a record on, and certainly we've had a fantastic number of records from partners, as well as we have verifiers collecting this data. But we do have a bit of a challenge in terms of private land and getting records from those. So where we have gaps, we don't actually know there are no trees there. It could just be that there's been no recording in that area. So one of the bold ambitions I have for this landscape is a systematic recording where we're doing landholding by landholding. So that's what I've been doing. So again, through the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, which kick-started the whole process, thankfully, I've been out recording trees on farmland predominantly. And this is kind of a good example of what I'm finding. So a lot of them are kind of veteran trees on the edge of farm systems that have just had a bit bad life or a hard life, but have started to accumulate features of interest that could be valuable for some of the specialist species that rely on them. And these trees also have a lot of issues. So one of the things I'm looking at doing is assessing the condition of these trees and advising those landowners what measures they might be able to take to help them stand much longer. So these are some typical examples. Although we don't have much livestock farming in the landscape, the tree in the middle, you can see that sheep have been congregating around the base of that tree. And then also the one on the right-hand side is very isolated with not much tree cover close by, let alone other trees with valuable deadwood habitats. So a few highlights from that project, and just, I love this tree. So I've added the smile, but the eyes and eyebrows are there. This tree has been veteranized by golfers on a golf course down at Woollerton. But just to highlight some of the kind of things that we achieved during that project. So 2,500 hectares have been surveyed so far as part of this systematic approach. 4%. I've got a little way to go to get to achieving the whole landscape, but that's enabled 700 ancient and veteran tree new records to the ATI. and we've made management recommendations across 130 hectares of ancient wood pasture. And what's also been achieved here is a consistent ancient and veteran tree survey approach across the Berklands and Bilhall SI, which is managed by different bodies. And as part of this, we've also been running lots of different training and workshops aimed at environmental professionals ranging from ARBs to rangers to conservation advisors, anyone where these are working in a related field that would benefit from learning from either techniques that we can use to help bridge the gap, because certainly one of the biggest issues we have is a lack of next generation trees which will provide the continuity of habitat required for these for the specialist communities relying on these habitats. Also veteran tree assessments and training, and also wood pasture creation and restoration has been another focus. And one project that we've been running since last year, which looking to kind of build and develop further, we've been doing vein trapping for saprozylic beetles. So saprozylic is any species that relies on dead wood habitat for part of its life cycle. So we've been focusing on saprozylic beetles, of which Sherwood has a very special community. In terms of saprozylic invertebrates, Sherwood is quite unique in that it is home to both a southern and northern community combined, which makes it very, very unique. And while Sherwood, as in Berklands and Bilhall SI, has been surveyed quite extensively, the wider landscape hasn't. So that's what we've been looking at doing. We've been setting up vein traps on ancient veterans in the wider landscape. This is a collection of trees, absolutely spectacular trees. There's quite a few across the farm in total, and some really special results have come from this survey. So this was done in partnership with RSPB and funded by a project called Minor to Major, which was a nature-funded landscape scale project in Sherwood, which comes to an end in June this year, unfortunately. But they really enabled some fantastic work, and this survey found an incredible number of species. 43 species that rely on deadwood habitat were found in these trees, including this, which was the rarest beetle found during the survey. It was found in 9 of the 10 traps across site, so which was a fantastic result. And certainly using Natural England software in terms of highlighting the importance or the assemblage and the importance of the assemblage across this site, it suggests that this site is in favourable condition for these species requiring heartwood decay, which is very exciting to have found that outside of that main concentration. But we still have work to do there. So I chair a group called the Sherwood Habitat Strategy Group. I just started as chair at the end of last year, and we've been working really, really intensely in producing a State of Nature report for Sherwood. This is the second in the series so far, and I've put a little QR code up there if anyone wants to take a picture to see the report. But what's really important is that we are working to record and monitor what's happening at this across this landscape, because that's really vital for informing what interventions and actions we take as conservationists, and also to help inform and inspire those landowners and land managers that form this landscape. And just to kind of go back to some of the challenges that we have in this landscape. So certainly from an ancient and veteran tree perspective, obviously when you have a named tree, quite often very popular to visit, and the major oak has certainly been a prime example of that. You can see these images, illustrations and images of the impact that has been had from hundreds of thousands of visitors, and even from the Victorian time, you can see massive impact in terms of soil loss, compaction, and unfortunately that does seem to be having an impact now on the tree. So RSPB, who manage that area, are doing some interesting work to look at mitigating those issues. And I've been lucky enough to work with Reg Harris here to take some sign cutting so we can graft from the major oak. This won't obviously help the major oak directly, but certainly we do need to be conserving the genetics of these important trees. And you can see Emma here at Windsor at Kew Gardens, who's actually successfully grafted from a number of ancient oaks. And I drove the scion down to Windsor the following day to be grafted, and we've got 40 grafts, which everyone, cross your fingers, hopefully will take. And it was a really fascinating process, also looking at the difference between the rootstock grown on from ancients. So we grafted 2 saplings from the major oak compared to saplings that were generic rootstock from a tree nursery. Very different in form and structure, and it does make you think whether we're planting the correct genetic stock that are going to be resilient for the challenges that we've got ahead. And also, this was a meeting we had before. So one of the other things we're kind of exploring, and this is with Andy Hines from Myers Co. We're looking at fitting dendrometers to the major oak, so we can look in real time actually what's happening. We can tell it's in decline, but that's, obviously we can make that visual assessment. But we're looking at fitting these dendrometers so we can look at the growth and shrinkage and compare different functional units across the tree as well, and compare that to a control. And this is really exciting. We're hoping to also have some fixed point photography so we can compare that to what we're seeing in real time. So some fascinating projects that I feel really privileged to be part of in this landscape. And I just wanted to kind of, I'm almost finished, and I just wanted to kind of highlight one thing that I quite often hear in Sherwood, and I think the major oak is one of those, and that I think people look at, it obviously has a long history of interventions, many of which cannot be undone, or certainly if they were. So for example, the propping, if you were to remove the props from the major oak, that would, cause a catastrophic failure for the tree. And a lot of people do comment on why don't we allow these trees to die naturally. And I think one of the things that is really important to remember is that we don't really have the luxury in terms of quantity of habitat. So this data is something, so Luke Steer, who's, if you don't know Luke, he's a specialist ARB consultant who has worked for many years in Sherwood, and he has almost 15 years worth of data looking at the trees there. And kind of using his data, I made this little graph just to highlight to people the difference made by keeping a tree standing as long as possible. So the orange line is at a loss of 2 trees per year. So we've got just over 400 trees at the moment. If we lose 2 trees per year, which doesn't sound a huge amount when you've got 400 trees, that means in 200 years, we'll have completely lost that habitat. And just to kind of highlight that the specialist species that rely on these trees, that could mean a kind of catastrophic site extinction for those species. So if we could reduce that loss to 0.5 trees per year, that massively extends the opportunity for kind of habitat continuity to 800 years. And what's important here is when we consider the next generation trees, and this is what we don't have the luxury of, unfortunately, and I think this is very typical across the UK. So the next generation trees in Sherwood are around 100 years old, so big difference to 400, 500, 600 years plus. So a 100-year-old tree is probably not going to start generating those kind of crucial habitats for another 300 years. which means our next generation trees won't provide any habitat well over 100 years, beyond the point that we've lost all of those existing ancient veterans. So what we really need to be thinking about is how we bridge that gap. First and foremost, it's about how long we can keep those trees standing. That's really important. But then it's been really interesting exploring other avenues such as veteranization, beetle boxes. But yeah, I think this is a really powerful graph, because I think a lot of people look at Sherwood and think 400 plus trees, amazing. That's somewhere that's quite safe for these specialist communities. But actually it's a bit scarier than that. And when you take climate change into consideration, it's even scarier, future ahead. And that would potentially be the kind of volume of habitat. So my priorities going forward are continuing to develop a better understanding of what we have and their condition, exploring ways to bridge the gap, support quality habitat creation, upskilling and learning. Research, really important, that helps inform and inspire best practice, continuing to build a strong network, and inspiring a broader audience. It's really important that everyone values ancient and veteran trees and wood pasture habitat in general. And just to give you a bit of vision for what my vision for the landscape ahead, this is a typical landscape of Sherwood. Arable farmland. If anyone's heard of Repton's Red Books, this is Hackett's Red Book. So this is what I hope we could achieve in the long term, that would help provide continuity of habitat in the future, but also trees working for us in landscape in many ways. So yeah, thank you. That's me finished. I'll just stop sharing.
Thanks, Lou. We got some great reactions then. Your loss of habitat diagrams are, yeah, really powerful, and perhaps it'll be the first time that some people have seen that. So thank you for showing it. And I really like your red book doodles. They're fab. Very nice. Lots of nice words coming in through the chat, and the questions are adding up. Thanks again. All right, Sharon, are we ready?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. Here we go. Bear with me and I'll move this one across. There. So thank you very much for inviting me. My career and my life has been absolutely made by inspirational women. So thank you. So today I'm going to talk a bit about my personal experience of arboriculture. So I'm 56 and I first became aware of arboriculture when I was 16 through the wonderful world of volunteering. So I'm 16 years old and I've got no money and I want to go on holiday. So I found the conservation volunteers, and through that I learned to be independent, go across the country by train on my own, meet a bunch of strangers, carry out some conservation work, and basically have a good time. And really not much has changed in that photograph. There I am, except I don't hold an axe very often. So that for me set off a lifelong love of trees. So when I got my lousy A-level results, I switched from astrophysics to doing geography and landscape studies. But at the time, in the mid-80s, it was a little bit weird. And every time I came back from one of these holidays, my mates would sing, "She's a lumberjack and she's okay." But things have moved on for the better. So I recommend getting involved with voluntary groups. I mean, we've just heard the wonders of the Woodland Trust. We have so many different charities and organisations here in the UK and across the world. And really, it's whatever you feel you're able to do. Maybe for you, it's getting your hands dirty and doing some planning and planting and coppicing. Or maybe you want to do some campaigning or fundraising. There are all sorts of programs through these different organisations For example, the Tree Council has a tree warden scheme. I helped run one years ago. And also there are things with observatory where you're actually carrying out citizen science. So volunteering is really important for the volunteer. It's really important for the landscape, but it's also really important for collective arboriculture because we're furthering the science and the knowledge of arboriculture, which we really need right now for our planet. So if you're watching this and you don't currently work with trees and you're thinking of getting involved, why not reach out to your local group? Certainly will make a difference. So after that, after my degree and volunteering, I started off as a tree officer. Now, tree officers are the backbone of arboriculture in the UK, and I was a tree officer in 2 separate stints, totaling 11 years. And here I am in the late 80s, and this is one of 5 community woodlands I planted with the community, for the community, using local groups. And they're all fairly sort of significant in size, and now I can walk through them and I can see what a difference it's made to the landscape. But it's interesting to see how things have changed, because in my trouser pocket there is a massive, great big walkie-talkie. It's just before I'd even heard of a mobile phone. But, you know, tree planting, it remains a constant throughout the years. So I urge you to get involved with that. But as a tree officer, you get involved with so many different things. But so I learned about trees and the planning process. You get involved with tree legislation, you know, making sure that protected trees are protected. I personally carried out prosecutions as well. And also to manage large tree populations and have that overview of a borough's tree, sort of how the trees are progressing, planning new planting, dealing with hazardous trees, and communicating with the public. In fact, during my time as a tree officer, I began to realise it was as much about the people as it was about the trees. But I am concerned, very concerned, that tree officers are underfunded and under-resourced and underappreciated. In fact, we still have a problem in the UK where there are just simply not enough, or there aren't any. So if you think about where you live, if there are no tree officers, may I recommend that you canvass your local authority and remind them of the valuable work that they do. Tree officers are not a nice to have, they're a need to have. So let's applaud them. And I also applaud the hard-working tree officers and women tree officers in the organisations, in the Association of Tree Officers, the London Tree Officers Association, and the Municipal Tree Officers Association, who really help you feel less isolated. They were a lifeline to me when I was working. And every year there is a National Tree Officers Conference run by the Institute of Chartered Foresters in cooperation with these organisations, and just belong to your professional bodies, the Arboricultural Association. What can I say? What a fantastic resource and community of people, as well as the Institute of Chartered Foresters. So tree officers, we need you. It's a great career choice. I'm so glad I've had that experience, but I think we need to take things further. We have biodiversity net gain now in the UK, and that's going to lead to enhanced landscaping schemes. And we have a problem with trees being properly cared for during construction. Now, local authorities traditionally have enforcement officers. They may not be specialists, and the tree officers already working flat out. So I think every local authority should have a green infrastructure enforcement officer, somebody who is appropriately qualified and experienced, who can really look at ecological issues, tree issues, and landscape issues. So I hope that along with we should do biodiversity net gain, let there be some central government funding. That's a personal view of mine, but one I like to share. But going back to my own life, I now move to the fairy cake years. So I tell you this story about myself because I want to give hope to everybody who perhaps takes some time out of their career. So for me, I was a traditional housewife for 7 years. So I was at home with my children. There was no thoughts about me having any future career at all. And I kind of felt all lost at sea. So I say to you, if you're in that situation, if you are no longer working, for whatever reason, maybe it's caring or health, whatever, and you're thinking about coming back to work, we are here for you. We, women in arboriculture, are here to support you. We are waiting, and you can rebuild your career. So have hope. And when I went back to work in the year 2000, I hadn't even turned on a computer. It took me a year till somebody told me when I was a tree officer I might have some emails, honestly. But you can do it. You can do it, ladies. So from then on, I carried out some further study, and I'm so grateful. Big shout out to Tree Life, who changed my life. So I did the level 4 in arboriculture when I was 38. But there are other great organisations. I've just picked out a few here. So there's a training tree and there's universities, although not as many are providing courses as they were, because people don't know it's a job, do they? So we've got to let them know. And today I had a conversation with Jackie Hoff from City and Guilds, who's actually looking at the level 2 and the level 3. And she's reaching out to us as industry because she wants to know what's relevant for employers. So I've got her email address up there, so hopefully you can contact her. And again, if you're thinking of joining arboriculture or you're already in industry, I urge you to join your professional bodies, and both of whom have opportunities to become chartered. So there's great links on their websites there. So from that, I went to manage a tree surgeons. Now, we've heard from Cecily, so I can't possibly add to anything she said. And it's that my own experience is what I managed a group of tree surgeons, and it wasn't my strength. So I moved quite quickly within the same organisation into consultancy, and it was 2005, and it was a really timely iteration of a British standard here, trees in relation to design, demolition and construction. So consultancy really took off for me. And there I actually grew a business for the owner there and employed a number of ecologists, arboriculturists, landscape architects. I did that for 10 years, and now for the last 10 years I've been self-employed, and I love arboricultural consultancy. It is really quite diverse. It's as diverse as you can do it, and a lot of my job is surveying, and sometimes it really is a walk in the park. The sun is shining, the birds are singing, I could park there easily. Maybe it's a really nice site. Maybe, ladies, there's a loo, which would make a nice change, wouldn't it, rather than other methods. So it can be really enjoyable, and you really get to see the trees and you learn so much. Sometimes it's like this. Hey, that's life. We're still learning, and it was raining and there was all sorts of rubbish on the ground, and there was even decomposing rats, but someone's got to look at the trees, and so you take the rough with the smooth. But I think one of the really interesting things about consultancy is actually relaying technical information to people who need to make decisions. So as consultants, we're just given an opinion, really. So I like to think hard about how can I relay complex information quickly so that we can make a difference. So in my job, I carry out tree surveys, and this is one which was being looked at. Is there anywhere in this site where we could develop? Well, actually on this one, not really, but I tend to use a sort of colour-coded system of, green trees, you just cannot remove them, and the blue ones, incredibly important as well. And I find different methods of relaying to architects and to planners and to clients so that we can guide and inform the development process. So that's part of what I do as a consultant. Another consultant role is really looking at the health and condition of trees. So doing a tree hazard survey. And as part of that, we would consider if that tree fell over, where might it fall? We call that the target. So in this particular slide here, we've got a dead hazardous tree, which is right next to a road opposite a school. So clearly that's really important that that's dealt with. Subject to ecological and legal checks, of course. Or conversely, this tree here, just an old dead dying stump, decaying, let it just rot away and do its thing and decompose back into the soil. Because if it fell, it's not going to cause any harm. But most of my personal work is to do with placemaking. And so this slide here, on the left-hand side, I'm part of a team of different consultants working with landscape architects, ecologists, and soil and flood risk, etc. And on the right-hand side, we're working within a sort of framework, and that's national policy and legislation, as well as local policies and strategies. And I'm a big advocate of strong local policies in local plans. But we also have to be mindful of politics and what the developer is aspiring to do, which we as a team on the left-hand side encourage them to do as well as possible. And also to look at the land use history, because ultimately what we want to achieve is healthy, sustainable placemaking for the community with them actively involved. And it can go really well. It doesn't always, but it really can. And this is a 6,000 home scheme I'm working on in Essex at the moment, which is truly landscape-led. But again, it's about relaying information simply and easily. And this is another diagrammatic technical drawing for the design team to really help understand what can be kept, which is pretty much everything on that drawing, and what will be removed, but pointing out a hazard being there on an oak tree. And I find this a really effective way of working. But my own career has been greatly enriched by the people I meet along the way. So I think it's really important that whatever way you work in arboriculture, you get your hands dirty one way or another. And so for me, working mainly in construction, it's actually speaking to people who do the work. So I learn from them and they learn from me. So this seems quite simple really, but what we were doing is changing the surface around a really important cherry tree with big fat surface roots. So how can we do that really well without causing harm to the tree when the default position is just to put a load of tarmac down on top of the roots? And so we managed that well, and I used biochar, which Cecily talked about earlier. And it's this sort of hands-on experience is really important, but it's hard for me to get on site if there's no planning condition requiring site supervision. So again, I put out a plea there for anybody, planning officers or tree officers should recommend strong planning conditions so that we can go out on site, so that we can take care of trees just how we said. Because this is one which shows some really decent tree protection fencing, but it's not always the case. Sometimes I'm disappointed. I was disappointed on a site last week. I did think about putting that photograph in, but it wasn't great, but now it's okay. So, and sometimes it's also about innovation and trying something new. Because I work a lot in London and its space is tight and problems are complex. And one of the regular problems I see is ground contamination. So the ground contamination consultant, it's their job to keep things safe for the people who are going to be living on that space afterwards. So what they want to do is they want to dig down to 600 millimetres. And what's in the top 600 millimetres? All the tree roots. Or they say, okay, then we can't dig down. We'll just put a load of tarmac or hard surfacing around that. But we don't want to do that either. It's not great for the tree. And also it means there can be no urban greening. Or they might say, okay, what we'll do is we'll put 600 millimetres of thick clay capping on top. Well, we don't want to do that either, because the tree roots won't be able to function. So I've tried a method, and I'd love to hear from you if you've got different ideas, of using, I work with Green Blue Urban, who I really respect, and we've put down some aeration pipes so that the air can still get to the roots, and then a lighter scree of topsoil and a warning layer of orange netlon. So watch this space. I'll let you all know how it goes. But I love the nitty-gritty of how we can build near trees, all that sort of detail, enjoying that connection with the guys and girls on site. By the way, it's International Women's Day, and in the last 2 or 3 years, there's a huge increase in the number of professional assistant site managers, apprentice site managers, engineers, obviously architects. I go out on site now and it's great. I always have a chat with them. Haven't yet met a female site manager, and I know that I will shortly because they're in training. So I think that's a wonderful thing. Keep it up. And because I've been around a long time, I try and go back to some of my old sites. And here's one I made earlier in Islington. And this is one that did go really well. And I actually looked at my site supervision notes, and I'd been there 18 times, and the whole length of the project for me was 6 years. And we managed to keep 2 small woodlands protected by TPOs, protect the trees, do really tricky, sensitive work around those trees, including removing Japanese knotweed, a load of rubbish, a sloping site, a train track tunnel underneath, a site important for nature conservation, everybody watching, you name it. And so we planted 5,000 trees, some of which were school children, nature walks and woodlands and bird hides, and I'm pretty chuffed with that one. But again, it was partly helped by a really strong local authority and a really good tree officer team at Islington Council. I really felt that it was a partnership, and it was great. So this really has been my classroom as well as formal learning. It's been, and CPDs, it's been going out and seeing trees, whether it be on construction sites or as part of surveying. I have never stopped learning, and I've got another 56 years to go, I do hope, of learning. So other things you can do in arboriculture is really look at the science. I mean, here in the UK, we've got Forest Research, which are an incredible organisation with all sorts of forest scientists, from pathologists, plant pathologists, all the way to social science and everything in between. And the wealth of data available on that website is extraordinary. My own personal science, deep science journey was using ground penetrating radar, which I used that for 10 years, and that will scan the ground and send a pulse down to 3 meters and pick up a root with a diameter of 20 mil, as thick as your thumb and above, because it contains water, so that you can create this 3D scan and a top-down view and a virtual cross section. And that was super useful in many ways. In terms of seeing how many live roots there are from a health point of view, also very good for understanding if you needed to do something near a tree and wanted to be really sensitive. But I loved your presentation, Louise. You were talking about ancient and veteran trees and how important they are. And I actually scanned the major oak a few years ago and found that in one area it was rooting out to 40 meters, which is incredible, away from that sort of grove of trees behind it. And so this really illustrated some work I did with a dear friend of mine, Ian Lee, who now works with the tree radar. And we found that these veteran oaks were rooting beyond the normal root protection area, even beyond the ancient tree forum root protection area. And it just shows, when we've got these ancient and veteran trees, we need to be so respectful of the entire tree, of its root system. And it's more dependent and more sensitive than ever than what's happening underneath the ground. So it's really heartening to see the protection and the good work that's being done by everybody on this at Kew and at Sherwood and beyond. So I think science really helps us. And like Cecily, you know, I've had quite a lot of experience with air spade. Here I am in Holland, trying something out there. And Cecily also pointed out the wealth of scientific kit which needs to be used well, analysed well by experienced people to help make informed decisions. It's not a question of plugging the machine and then, oh, look, that's what it says. It really is about that sensitive scientific understanding the data that you're looking at carefully. So this is some friends of mine, Tracy Clark Tree Consultancy, who I use a lot. That's definitely not me. I poo my pants. So the other thing that's been a huge part of my life is governance. So governance is an opportunity for you as ARBs, or maybe you're thinking of it, to really influence an organisation. So maybe those charities I showed earlier. At the Arboricultural Association, I love this slide. So you're very lucky, we're very lucky in that we have Michelle Ryan as chair. And look, I saw on LinkedIn today, she's just been recognised for an outstanding contribution. So well done, Michelle. Congratulations on that. But I also love this slide because 5 of the trustees there are women. So it's half and half. So that's brilliant. And my own journey is that of the Institute of Chartered Foresters, I was on the council for 8 years and I was president for the last 2 years, finishing almost a year ago now. So what's great about governance is because it does take you out your comfort zone. You get the chance to be eyes on, hands off. I learnt about things that I wouldn't normally have touched with a barge pole, really, but it's enriched my life. Human resources, financial matters, all sorts of the way that an organisation operates. But I recommend governance to you. So have a think about that. And also, I think we're nothing without community. Many of you have had positive experiences, I'm sure, of being involved with volunteers. This is one of my projects with a group of office workers. They were occupational health and safety officers who came out for a day to work in a woodland I was managing. And I also love working with groups who perhaps didn't feel as confident, perhaps didn't have the best start in life. And again, it's not just about the doing and achieving, it's about the being. It's about holding a bow saw for the first time in your life. It's about gaining self-esteem and confidence and establishing greater motor skills and social skills. So I think it's really important. And I try and do it as part of construction with mixed results. I've got a number of projects where I've been able to get children on site to actually do some planting, and I've got another one happening in November. But it doesn't happen often enough, and I still struggle with trying to persuade clients that we need to do this more. But another thing I'm absolutely excited about is sustainable use of timber. So if we are taking trees down, and there seems to be a real movement now, in the past they've just been chopped up and taken away, or well, left in situ, well, that has a value. But actually, sometimes there's an opportunity to actually do something better than that, be it as simple as play logs or seating, but maybe at the other end, engaging with an artist and getting a community group or children along to create something, to leave a legacy piece in that particular location, because nobody wants to see a tree go. So let's do something useful with it. People love the experience and the story behind wood used for good. So I think we all have a responsibility. If you work in arboriculture, be you a tree officer or an arboricultural consultant or a tree surgeon, is to think about the end use of the beautiful timber that's taken the trouble to grow there. And there's not enough obviously, is there? You know, there are not enough arboriculturalists in industry. So find your groove. I just looked on LinkedIn today, and we've got the wonderful Stella Boland, who is a trustee, and we've got Kimberly Howard, who I know very well, who's written a brilliant article in the Arboricultural Association newsletter on how we should work together as tree officers and consultants. And Kathleen Nutkins as well, formerly of the Woodland Trust, who's at the Future Build. I was there myself on Tuesday doing a great job on the Trees Design and Action group, just shouting out about the greatness of trees and how wonderful. And I personally have a podcast because I'm so privileged to speak to incredible people around the world, sharing their stories of how they're making a difference to the environment and giving them an opportunity to get their message across the world. So maybe public speaking isn't your thing, and that's okay. Maybe just having a cup of tea with a mate and sharing about the experience. But we need to share the good news of trees and the good news of working with trees. Something I've recently got into is, if you're an arboriculturalist and you want to make a difference to development, have you thought about sitting on a quality review panel? This is an independent panel of experts. I've recently joined the Essex one, and I love it. So I recommend that as your expertise as an arboriculturalist. I know they hadn't had an arboriculturalist before. I don't think there's many people who do it. Maybe I'm the only one. So let's set a trend. So whoever you are, whatever you feel like, whatever you look like, whatever you believe, there's a place for you in arboriculture. You are very welcome. And let's do it together. We are here as women in arboriculture to welcome you with open arms. The future must be green, so let's work together. Thank you. Stop sharing.
Thanks, Sharon. That was really great. Blimey, you've seen and done it all. That was brilliant.
Halfway through.
Yeah, it'd be great to see what you move on to next. We've got loads of questions, so I might give each of you one question and then we'll see where we get to. But loads of great comments coming through the chat. Lots of thanks. Yeah, they're nice to see them all coming in. All right, so I've had a look at some questions. What we normally do is we go through a couple of them, and then we will send all of the questions to our speakers. And if any of them additionally take their fancy, they will come to you with a question after tonight. So you may get a response after tonight, given that we can't get through them all now. Right, I'm going to go straight to Cecily with a question from from Rhonda Wood. Great name. Rhonda asks, is there a wood reutilisation programme for the gardens? So basically, if a tree comes down at Kew, do you have a plan as to what you do with them? Anything special?
Yes, so all the wood stays on site with us at Kew. Depending on its size, if it's a full trunk or small branches or a full tree, it will get sent to different places. So we have a large stable yard where all of our wood gets mulched down and then sent back out to the garden after it's been heated in our compost heap to kill off all those bugs and nasties. And then it's used across the garden as different types of mulch. In lockdown, we did a fantastic project on a children's tree log trail where large trees that had been removed from the collection, we'd kept large bits of wood and we created a fantastic log trail for kids and carved different animals. And it was an amazing opportunity, actually, because it really does keep these old big trees within our landscape and give them a new life. As Sharon was talking about. So yes, everything stays on site and nothing leaves. All the dead wood gets mulched and it's a lovely cycle.
Nice, thanks, Cecily. I'm going to follow up with another one for you because I'm interested in the answer. So given all the problems we have with water management and the particular stress in that part of the country, what do you do about water? So Paul Lambert asks, have you considered additional water reservoirs? Tell me how you go about managing water. Do you water your mature trees at Kew, for example?
So watering is a tricky one. We obviously have reservoirs on site through different types of infrastructure, like the big glass houses have their own reservoirs because they're using a lot of water all year round, not just in the summer, to keep those temperate environments going all day. The rest of the garden is linked together with different hose systems, and unfortunately I think a lot of our water struggles is down to people and manpower. So over the really heavy summers where we were facing really high temperatures, we were struggling just because we're a really small team of across site. We're 350 acres and I think there's only about 100 horticulturists. So that's across glass, across every department, you know. So we lack the infrastructure to hold the reservoirs. That is something going forward that I know a lot of the new building at Kew is really putting into their thought process of what we can do more. But I think it's one of those, no easy answer. We do have the reservoirs to a point, but going forward, I think we need more people.
Cool. Thanks, Cecily. Okay, I've got one for Lou then. Kimberly Adams says, epic that you are finding veteran trees on private land. And she asks, are you having a good response from people on farmland? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, I think actually what I found through my surveys is it's been an open door. Because I'm not approaching owners with an ask other than for me to look at what they've got. And actually, in the majority of cases, certainly on the farms that I've been surveying, they will very quickly and happily show me to their most interesting trees as well, and take a lot of pride in them. I think they're not necessarily always kind of doing or following best practice in terms of management and care of those trees, but the fact that they enthusiastically care for them in the first place is an opportunity, and that's something that I'm kind of working to work with those owners on.
Lovely. Okay, one for you then, Sharon.
Mm-hmm.
Eve Goddard says, you have to be really resilient to push back to the construction industry. And I think probably all looking for a bit of wisdom from you, particularly on this one. How do you stay positive when facing resistance?
It's really interesting, actually. I've gone through various stages of being initially, when I was in my early 20s, a little bit stroppy. And then I became a lot of shoulder pads and strutting about and big earrings. And then as I got more mellow and more sort of pragmatic, and it's really interesting. This is Women in Arb, so I'm going to talk about being a woman here. I am now postmenopausal and loving it, okay? And I feel that I've really found my voice, and I have found that my clients actually prefer it if I just, and I've probably been postmenopausal for 5 years, but I certainly say, look, I'm telling you this for your own good. You will not get permission for that. And these are the reasons why. Why don't I save you the trouble? Let's do it this way round. And they may go, well, you know, and often it does make a difference. The other thing that I found highly effective, which I've spoken about publicly before, is particularly for something called an arboricultural method statement, which is a really technical report post-planning, is if I'm going to be engaged by a client to produce that, part of my rider is that I say, in order for me to write this for you, I would like a Teams meeting or an actual meeting with all of the design consultants, so the engineer, the architect, the landscape architect, the civil engineer, the structural engineer, and the construction team. I'd like you all to be there, and I'm going to chair the meeting. And they go, all right then. And I say, it's going to save you time and money, because if you could give me an hour of those people's time, it's going to stop 100 emails toing and froing. So then I chair the meeting and I put a plan up of the site. And I say, let's say there's 10 trees, and let's say it's in London. I say, see that tree over there? I see the buildings over there, but what's happening around this tree? It looks like it's going to be okay. Oh yeah, nothing's happening there. Oh, and apart from the underground storage water tank, apart from the drainage, apart from, oh, that's where I'm going to put the concrete silo. And when you start to unpick all the subtle nuances of what's actually happening on a construction site, you can actually make changes. And then I've literally had the client that say, okay, you've all got your homework to do, where other people have to go away and they have to make the changes, because they're not thinking, why should they be thinking about the trees? That's our job. But it is our job also to communicate and not to be passive. We cannot be passive. So in answer, Eve, to your excellent question, I don't always win, don't always get what I want, but I do a lot by being really clear and actually being quite strong. But ultimately, I tell them, I've got your interests at heart. And so I see what you need to do. But to do that, we've got to take care of the trees. Biodiversity net gain is going to help. I hope that answers. It's quite a long answer, I'm sorry.
It's a great answer. I love the idea of having a rider.
I have a rider.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, I'll go back to Lou for one. Catherine Church said, well, her interest was piqued at the golf course tree that was veteranized. But as far as she understood, veteranization was mainly done on younger trees. So could you clarify what your approach is to veteranization?
Yes. So I was being a bit flippant with that comment. So it's a good one to clarify. What I meant was, I can't show you the picture, but essentially that tree was being veteranized by the golfers by being hit by multiple golf balls. So it's not a tree that's had a veteranization technique applied to it. It's certainly beyond that stage. I would absolutely never look to veteranize a tree that has existing features. Veteranization should be practiced on young trees, because as Vicky Bengtson says, Mother Nature does it best, and where you've got those features existing, they should be allowed to continue to develop naturally. So yes, that tree has not had a veteranization technique. It was just it kind of gaining interesting features as a result of unfortunately being hit by many balls because it is in direct line. So yes.
Lovely. Thank you. Okay, a question for you all, possibly, but from an anonymous person who said, ARB seems to attract the least amount of women to the operational side. Why does the panel think this is, and what can we do to address it? Now, this isn't my area at all, but I'd like for someone to comment if they can.
I mean, I'm not the voice of this, but I feel like I didn't know it existed. I think I came into it later because I didn't see tree surgeons up trees. I didn't see it going on in front of me. And I think when you're in school and in higher education, when you're leaving high school, it wasn't a choice. I didn't have that choice to join an apprenticeship or to think that a land-based study would be something that I wanted to do. I mean, we lived in Scotland surrounded by farms, and I think a lot of the sort of bad controversy around the thought process of if you couldn't go on to further education, you were going to stay in land-based studies because you maybe didn't have the ability to go on and study something else, which is completely ridiculous. And what I've learned in the last 8 years has really changed my view on it completely.
Thanks, Cecily. Does anyone have anything to add?
Well, I just think it's so wonderful that Cecily is so visible. Just, you know, you're just standing up and being a wonderful, powerful advert for young ladies going into working on the tools. And when I was at school, I'd never heard of a woman tree surgeon. I mean, it's not me. I'm naturally clumsy, so it's not for me. But I think it's truly inspirational, the work you're doing. And the more visible, I think any woman working in arboriculture, if you can, be visible, be proud. And so you're making it seem more normalised because, well done. Let's just do it, women.
Cool. Okay. I think we'll leave it there. I did promise I will send you all of the questions so you can read through them at your own pace and get back to anyone if you feel the urge to do that. But so we'll go on to the very last set of questions, which we must ask you before we let you go, which is about tree-related books. And I love this bit of the webinar. And I think I'll start with Cecily, if I may. Can you tell us what your favourite tree-related book is, please?
Yes, I found this really, really useful coming back into studying trees and doing like horticulture and arboriculture. And I promise I'm not being paid by Kew to advertise this, but I found it so interesting and so easy to use. It's a plant glossary, so when you're looking at something on a tree or the shape of a leaf or maybe the way that it grows, this book literally has everything and it explains it down to a T so that you know what it's called, but also why it is the way it is.
Lovely. Do we have the author for that one?
Hank. Oh God.
Is it hard to say or read?
Yes, it is.
Sorry.
Hank Dingy. Someone else will know.
Oh yeah. Let's have a shot of it. That'll do. Lovely.
People but it's fantastic. You can get it on Amazon, but it's honestly like it's my Bible. It's battered because it's just been used so much.
Wicked. Thanks, Cecily. Okay, who's next? Lou, your favourite tree-related book? Let's hear it.
Well, so I've gone a bit different because it's International Women's Day, so I thought I'd pick something connected to that. So I've actually chosen If Women Rose Rooted by Sharon Blackie. And so this is, so I'll just read the back actually because I think this is a really nice description. So she leads the reader on a quest to find their place in the world, drawing inspiration from the wise and powerful females in native mythology and guidance from contemporary women who have rerouted themselves in land and community and taken responsibility for shaping the future. So it kind of draws on Celtic mythology, stories of kind of, I think, powerful and inspiring women. And there's absolutely many links to trees and woods within these stories as well. And it's very inspiring and empowering.
Ah, never heard of that one. Sounds good. Thanks, Lou. Sharon?
Well, I love the sound of Lou's book, actually. I'm going to get that and read it. And I've read so many wonderful books for the podcast and I've interviewed the authors, which has been a real privilege. But my own, I have been on a webinar before and I'm going to say the same book because it is my favourite and most useful tree book. It is this one by Dr. David Lonsdale, Principles of Tree Hazard Assessment and Management. And you can see how battered it is. And I've had it for such a long time. They've actually got 3 different surnames, which kind of says it all, really. My Life in Trees. So absolutely love that book, but I've got a huge library of arboricultural books and I've got a pile by my bed. So bring it on. Well done, authors. Thank you.
Classic. Very good. I think we've had that one a few times, but it is a absolute staple, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
And there we go. Steve's popped the bookshop into the chat. So, you know, if you feel like a I don't know if we sell the David Lonsdale book. You might have to correct me. But anyway, okay. That wasn't so bad, was it? Thank you everyone for joining us. We had well over 250 people tuning in live, and I'm sure there'll be more watching back. The webinar will go out on YouTube within a week or so. So yeah, feel free to relive the experience. Thank you all. Thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Cecily. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Sharon. And with that, we'll say good night. Have a great weekend.